join us. We are very honored to have you here for this discussion. And before we start with the content, I want to explain a bit the what we see as the objective of the agenda, and maybe one word about why we wanted to do this. Um, as you know, EY is doing a couple has a couple of main elements they're doing. One of them being capitalization of knowledge from previous projects, including the urban innovative action projects. And recently, my colleagues managed, together with the consultants, to put forward one study, which is on finance. And I thought we had two options: to wait a bit more and prepare a very structured, organized, detailed webinar, or to decide to try in a very busy period to still do a webinar now, because many of you in the partnership, at least in food and cities and greening cities, you are starting the implementation. And I thought it's more valuable to present this information now and have it as a foundation, instead of waiting a couple of extra months later and then discover that you were doing something that was already done, or that connections that we missed. So with that said, my objective today is to present, together with the experts, the results of this Inception report. So it's the first part of it. Then to present to the experts quickly what you are doing in the two partnership on the topic of finance and funding, for them to understand your context and your interest. And then I would like to have an open discussion to address question and see what can we learn from the study and be used in your implementation. What I want you is not to reinvent the wheel, not to lose time, and to go directly to the main source. And for that, I kindly ask the experts to focus on the recommendation that you in the Urban Agenda Partnership can take forward. Now, with that said, I would like to record this session. If we haven't started that yet, we will do it right now. We will decide at the end with you if you would like to put public the entire recording together with the discussion we have here, or if you say no, some of the discussion are more internal, we would prefer to put just the presentations. That's up to you as a group to decide. We will just follow your decision. I do not assume there will be anything sensitive, but it's a point to discuss. Again, we wanted to do this internally in the partnership in order to be really open and comfortable to put any question. There is no bad question. There is just an opportunity for us to listen to the other opinion and learn from each other. So in terms of agenda, very quickly, we will start. My colleague Ray from the EY Capitalization Communication Department will say 2 words about the study they worked. Then we will have time from the experts that did the study to see what this meant. There will be around 20 minutes for that presentation, up to 20 minutes. Then we will go to the colleagues on food to present their action on the topic, and then to the colleagues on greening cities. After this, quickly, we will look at the questions received via the registration form and in the chat until that moment. And we will have, I really aim to have at least 15 minutes of an open discussion, where I kindly invite you to really engage in such a way that we all learn and make the implementation of our actions easier. And who knows, maybe the information you share will be relevant for the experts also. If that is fine for you, I will give the floor to my colleague Ray to present that. But just, is it all clear for now? Okay, thank you. Ray, you have the floor. Let me know when I should move.
Yeah. So hello from me as well. Thank you, Alex. My name is Rehana. As Alex said, I work at the Knowledge and Communication Unit at EUI. Thank you for giving us your time this morning. I hope you find the study interesting as much as we have found the results interesting. So yes, just a little bit of background about the study. During the last programming period, Urban Innovative Actions funded 86 projects within a variety of topics. So we had about 40 topics covered from energy transition to circular economy, jobs and skills, integration of migrants and refugees, housing, culture and cultural heritage, and lots more of the topics. So a lot of these projects came with an integrated approach, meaning that even though they might have focused on a specific topic, they had innovative ideas about how to integrate with other parts of the city. And also within that, their financing. So obviously they received 80% of the project was ERDF, but also for the viability of the project, they had to sometimes look into the innovative ideas for financing mechanisms. So the idea for this study was to look into the mechanisms and approaches that these cities have used to generate, mobilize different ways of financing and different sources of financing for the project. So with that, we looked at all of the 86 projects. I will allow our colleagues Karen and Eileen to explain a bit more about that. But yes, so the overall aim of this study for us was to look into the different financing schemes that these cities have used to, first of all, develop an inventory of all of these innovative financing schemes that were used. Um, determine if these financing schemes have helped the projects to achieve their objectives that they set out at the very beginning, and in which policy areas. So as I mentioned, under which topic. Also identify the success factors and the enabling conditions, and also the challenges and the obstacles that they help the cities to overcome. And obviously look into the recommendations and the lessons learned to be shared with other cities. Yep, next slide, please, Alex. Thank you. Yes, so we set out with three main categories of the research questions, 5 different questions in total. So as I mentioned, we first wanted to capture these good practices from the cities. So what forms of the IFSs have been used, and which one of them were the most efficient in driving innovation in cities. Second category of question was for us to, as I mentioned, identify the success factors and see if they have produced meaningful impact, and if yes, in what policy areas, and what were the most influential factors in successfully implementing such financial schemes. So whether it be political context, complementarity, and so on. And lastly, in EUI, we really do believe in upscaling and transfer of knowledge. So what were the lessons learned and the recommendations that the cities could have for other cities in the EU to potentially also use these financial schemes in other contexts. With this study, we have the help of Karen Galibolian and Eileen Crowley, who are the experts and the project manager that are helping us with this study. And they have more knowledge about the different financial instruments at the EU level and how cities can help with that. That's all from me. I can give the floor now, I think, to Karen to walk us more through the different financial schemes that were used. I hope it was clear about the aim of the study. Sorry if I went through it a bit too quickly. If there is a question, you can definitely put that in the chat. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
With that said, yeah, Karen, please.
Yes. Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure you can actually see my screen. Thank you both Alexandru and Ray for this opportunity, and we're very happy to see that there's so many people who are actually interested in our study. As you can imagine, for a few months we were just a few people like really bogged down into this, so it's nice to be able to talk about it a bit more. That being said, of course, as Alexandru mentioned, the study hasn't come to an end, but we've done the large majority of the work, so we're happy to share our initial findings. I will just move on to the next slide just to present the outline for our presentation. So initially, we would just like to very briefly introduce you or mention at least how is it that we see innovative financial schemes in the context of this study. This will be presented by my colleague Eileen. Then we will very briefly present the study, and then we'll move on to the actual findings and recommendations we have. Eileen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, so I think before we kick off with going into depth in the study, it's important to reflect a little bit on the many challenges that cities face today and the role that IFSs can play in that. So I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that cities are grappling with escalating socioeconomic and environmental challenges, climate change, access to affordable housing, infrastructure renewal, not to mention responding to crises like economic crashes, the recent pandemic, security issues, extreme weather events, as we've recently seen in Spain. And all of these issues require significant financial resources. And I think we all know that traditional public funding alone cannot meet these needs. So the only way forward really is for cities to adopt innovative financial schemes that can mobilize investments, attract private sector participation and engage communities in funding and decision-making processes. And with that in mind, we see that innovative financial schemes are emerging as key in bridging this investment gap and enabling cities to secure the changes that they need to secure. Next slide, please, Carrie. So during our desk research, we came across several references to and descriptions of IFSs, and we've encapsulated them here in this single unified definition. So innovative financial schemes refer to creative or novel approaches used by cities and urban practitioners to mobilize, distribute, or govern the use of funds for implementing urban development projects. I think what sets IFSs apart really is their creativity in being able to blend different and diverse financial sources and in fostering partnerships. So that comes to, when we talk about mobilizing, we mean mobilizing different funds from different sources. They're also, I suppose, really creative in how they distribute different funds and also how they govern these funds. Who are the partners that they bring together to make sure that the money goes to the places, to the target areas. Next slide, please. This is just to showcase some of the various innovative financial schemes that we identified during the literature review. I suppose the key point here is that while our study showcases numerous examples, and you'll see some of those later, such as local currencies and incentive schemes, it does not provide or cover all of the IFSs that are mentioned here, and that's simply because they were not available or used within the 86 projects that we looked at. So what we're going to showcase is not a reflection of the ones that we think are more relevant or important as viable solutions. It's just to say that all of these are relevant, but some of them were not seen in the projects that we looked at. So bonds, for example, can be a great way to attract large-scale funding. Microfinance can support grassroots entrepreneurship and small-scale improvements. Performance-based contracting, ensures better outcomes and value for money, and things like participatory budgeting helps to empower the community in decision-making on financial targets and budgets. So they're all very relevant, and the study recognizes this, but it just includes practical examples of the ones that we could find within the projects. And Carrie's going to showcase some of those now in the next slide. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Carrie, who can go deeper into the study and showcase some of those practical IFSs that we came across during our research.
Thank you, Eileen. I will just build on a little bit on what Ray said earlier about the study. Indeed, as she said, we really focused on the 86 projects that were funded by the UAE. We screened all of them to try to identify the available IFSs. So we identified a total of 37 innovative financial schemes. And keeping in mind that didn't mean that there were 37 projects that had them, because some projects had several IFSs within them. On the left-hand side, you can see kind of the number of IFSs per type of IFS. So as you can see, the most popular ones were the so-called classical funding scheme targeting innovation, incentive mechanisms. There were several local and virtual currencies. There was some crowdfunding, several public partnerships, and I think the others, we just had one example of each one of them. So in total, 10 distinct types of innovative financial schemes were identified within the UAE projects. On the next slide, I will just again briefly explain the biggest bulk of the work we did was really on developing these case studies that really dove deeper into the IFSs implemented in the project. So we to select them after the screening, we sent a survey to the projects that include to a select number of projects that had implemented IFSs. After that, the main of the study of the survey, was to gather general data because it was a very good source of information for us to understand what are actually the enabling conditions, what are the obstacles that the projects actually encountered when they were implementing the IFSs. And also it was a way for us to actually select the case studies. I will not bore you with the details, but ultimately we ended up selecting 12 case studies that showcased a wide variety of IFSs and a wide variety of topics as well. So the rest of this presentation will really be based on our findings from these 12 case studies. This is just a brief overview of the case studies and in which cities they were, which countries they were. So most of them were located in Belgium and the Netherlands and Italy and Spain. This is primarily explained by the fact that many of the UAE projects are first of all implemented in these countries. But also it seemed like within these countries there was the most interest in IFSs as well. But mostly I think it has to do with the number of projects in these countries. So I will walk you through some examples of IFSs. I will try to not spend too much time on this because we can talk about it for a long time, but let's just dive in for a few slides. Into specific IFSs. So one of them, as I mentioned, was local and virtual currencies. So several projects use those. So the aim of local currencies is to support the local economy, and they're often issued by local authorities to be used in kind of a defined geographical area when they're where basically they set up a system when there is a currency that can be used, obviously, for exchange of goods or services. Several of the projects actually were using virtual or digital currencies to using this blockchain technology, and they're more of a decentralized way so they're not set up by central banks, but or the local government. They were really set up as part of the projects. And I can show you an example, for example, from Antwerp. So the so-called Antwerp Circular South. This is where a digital currency, the so-called Circule, was set up as a kind of an incentive mechanism to encourage residents of a certain neighborhood in Antwerp who signed up for this scheme to encourage them to basically engage in sustainable behavior. And by this, I mean reducing the amount of waste they generated or the water and energy use. So they implemented a tracking system that enabled them to, which was the most kind of complex part of the project, apart from also setting up the digital currency. So in general, the project or the consortia involved in the project, they set up individual or group challenges. People could then sign up for a challenge, try to improve their behavior, which was tracked by the project, and they earned circules, which then they could use within the local municipal services such as swimming pools and cultural events and so on. So this is one example of a virtual currency. I'll move on to the next question, sorry, the next IFS, which showcases the example for use for crowdfunding. I'm sure you have heard about crowdfunding campaigns for various initiatives. In this case, however, it was really used to kind of help the reforestation and maintenance within the city. So this is an example from Italy, from the so-called Prato urban jungle. So they launched a digital platform which allowed citizens and local businesses and associations to directly contribute to the reforestation and maintenance of a specific area of the city, which was sort of dilapidated and really needed kind of help. So the platform provided information on how they could collaborate with the municipality, allowing individuals to kind of support urban forestry interventions through donations. And they also had the opportunity to actually propose their own initiatives themselves. Another IFS, which was quite interesting, was the revolving fund. So the revolving fund is a type of loan that create a continuous cycle of investment. So entities from the public or the private sector could lend money to fund a particular investment and then to use the payback of the loan to reinvest again in the future. For example, the example we have from the UAE is the so-called Icarus project in Ghent. So residents could apply to receive up to 30,000 euros, which could be used to pay for renovations of the houses to improve their energy efficiency, and kind of this, and also for some social and technical counseling surrounding the renovations. And once the houses were alienated, that meant they were either sold or rented, sorry, or even if the owner passed away, the money could be used. The money would come back into the revolving fund to renovate other houses and in the future. So here we've provided a small visual representation of this. So as you can see, in this project, they selected vulnerable house owners whose houses needed to be renovated. They set up and managed the revolving fund, which was used then to finance the house renovations. And then after the renovated houses were sold or anything like that, the funding went back into the fund, and it was meant to be used for other house renovations in the future. Another IFS we saw in at least one project was the so-called innovative procurement. So innovation in procurement refers to leveraging the purchasing power of cities to stimulate the development of new and innovative solutions or products or services that address specific urban needs or challenges. So this meant rethinking traditional procurement processes and adopting new methods that actively encourage and reward innovation. And by doing so, cities could increase the positive impact on their social, economic, and environmental objectives. So the example we saw within the UAE was Bridge from Rotterdam. So by law in the Netherlands, all service providers procured by the municipality with a contract with value of more of 50,000 euros or more, they have a contractual obligation of social return, so which is amounting to about 5% of the total value. So this means that these contractors were required or to use some of these funds to by social return means either employing people who were unemployed or supporting some sort of a project which helped unemployed people. This facilitated the establishment of a social return on investment fund where this money was collected, and it basically constituted of fines collected by contractors who did not comply with this obligation. And this money was then used for various programs which can then support people who were unemployed. A very interesting IFS that we discovered also in the process of looking into the projects was the so-called social impact credit scheme. So these are innovative financing schemes designed to incentivize and reward actions or investments that generate positive social or environmental outcomes. These schemes often involve a system of credits or tokens that can be earned or traded or used as financial support for initiatives with measurable social benefits. So this was another example from the same project from Rotterdam. They developed a social coin which they called RIX, to find activities that support people to gain employment upon leaving their education. So the scheme enables businesses to purchase social impact. to fund social entrepreneurs or to enable them to meet social return obligations simultaneously. And if an organization or a social enterprise makes an impact by developing the capacity of young people, for example, to enter employment, then it can be sold on the marketplace. So to make it maybe a little bit clearer, I'll walk you through the little visual representation of this IFS I have put on the left-hand side. So the municipality can issue a call for projects which support job seekers. They are then evaluated and given a social impact value, the so-called RICs, and they're posted on a platform. And businesses or who want to comply with the social return obligation I mentioned in the previous IFS, or those who are just looking to invest in social impact projects, can invest in the project. Then the projects with enough investments basically are implemented, and ultimately the idea is that businesses support job seekers via their investment in the project and also benefit from the availability of skilled labor down the road as a result. I believe the last IFS I will walk you through is the so-called community land trusts. So community land trust is a not-for-profit organization that owns and manages land on behalf of the community. By holding land in trust by the community and separating land ownership from property ownerships, the community land trusts can mitigate the impact of increasing real estate prices and rents. And this IFS is really innovative when it comes to really governance. And the governance as you may remember earlier, Eileen was speaking about IFSs and how they present new ways to mobilize, distribute, and govern funds. This is really important when it comes to governance. So community land trust boards are composed of homeowners, local community members, and representatives from local authorities, and they all hold equal decision-making power to kind of promote balanced and inclusive governance. One of the projects from the UAE, the so-called Calico in Brussels, really developed CLT, which resulted in the construction of 34 housing units. I will walk you through just some findings and recommendations we have on the basis of the case studies. One thing I want to show you here is the enabling factors. As you would have seen, the IFSs are really different. They vary in terms of the areas in which they're implemented, in terms of their size, in terms of the people involved in them. However, there's some common factors that we could see among the projects. So these are results from the survey that I mentioned earlier. So the most important enabling conditions were strong partnerships and collaboration. Of course, the UAE financial support was instrumental as well for the delivery of these projects. Strong political support, private sector engagement, the ability, kind of technical expertise, and public support and community engagement were some of the most important factors for developing an IFS. I will zoom into some of them. So indeed, strong partnerships, that meant collaboration with, as Eileen mentioned, this is one of the main kind of characteristic of IFSs, that they really involve a wide variety of stakeholders. So the collaboration between public authorities, private enterprises, NGOs, community groups, which bring together their expertise, their resources, and perspectives on the table is really key for the successful implementation of IFSs. Having a solid institutional capacity as well, because cities really need to build the capacity to support IFSs. They're quite new, so they require really new resources and skills. Having a supportive legal framework and regulatory environment and legal expertise. So we also found that the success of IFSs is often dependent on supportive environment, and this includes laws and regulations that enable cities to experiment and also implement these schemes. Also, obviously, goes without saying, sufficient financial resources. Cities really need access to funding to cover both the upfront cost of launching innovative schemes and, of course, the operational costs of maintaining them. Strong political support. Politicians and local representatives can send very strong messages about the importance of finding new ways of financing and the importance of creating an environment that values and really encourages IFS implementation. As mentioned before, definitely skills and expertise are key here, particularly in areas such as financial management, urban development, and IT, because as you might have noticed, several of the IFSs really required quite strong digital skills. Cross-departmental collaboration for large urban projects. We found that really all of these projects required the different departments within the municipalities come together and really to create IFSs that are really well integrated into the broader urban strategies and policies of municipalities. And finally, also just clear ex-ante assessment. So conducting thorough ex-ante assessment to really understand the feasibility and the potential impact of the proposed IFSs, to improve them also if necessary. I will mention some of the barriers and challenges that were faced by cities according to our study. As you can see, regulatory hurdles and technical complexity were the main challenges that were identified in the survey. So we split them into kind of inherent and external barriers. So the internal ones would have been technical capacity. And so often there was a lack of technical capacity that needed to be overcome. Also, there were issues around kind of ensuring compliance and monitoring. So, for example, you can think about the project that I mentioned from the Antwerp Circular South, where they wanted to reward sustainable behavior, but that meant that they needed to track it, and which is very difficult to be done on an individual level. Also, kind of, there were several public procurement and participant selection challenges related to some of the IFSs, and in general, resource constraints are always present. From external barriers perspective, yes, often there were regulatory hurdles. If you'd like, during the discussion, we can give you one or two examples. Also, they really needed to work hard to ensure investor confidence and interests. Sometimes they needed to kind of tackle lack of political support, or to ensure that there is really sufficient citizen engagement, because many of these IFSs really depend on citizens being engaged, and they're actually a key partner of the implementation of the IFSs. With this, I will move on to our main recommendations from the study. So we split them into recommendations for urban authorities and just the recommendations for policymakers. So when we're speaking about urban authorities, our recommendations are really to set up dedicated skills that are open to experimentation and really possess the expertise in various areas, as I mentioned before, funding and financing, in legal matters, IT, communications, community engagement. These are all very key areas that need to be strengthened when speaking about IFSs. Seek synergies, build consortia, and leverage the resources and expertise of partners. This also really helps to tackle issues such as lack of sufficient resources or lack of sufficient skills, or even lack of sufficient time, and also just increases the engagement and creates a sense of shared responsibility. Also leveraging already available resources and infrastructure within the cities. We can also provide you with examples with that, but for example, in the case of the Antwerp Circular South, they could use the fact that there were already there was already infrastructure within the city that enabled them to implement the IFS, such as cards on which they can implement, on which they can upload the reward system, so the so-called virtual currency. So just sometimes it's important to look around and see what is already there that can be put into good use. Also look for funding from various sources, such as municipal budgets, EU projects, commercial finance, EU financial instruments, also pension funds, for example, for revenue generating IFSs, or social impact funds for non-revenue generating IFSs. Look for existing platforms. So for example, if you remember the example from Rotterdam with RIX, this platform could be purchased. So the social impact platform can be purchased by cities. So they don't need to start from scratch and invest millions of euros. They can get it for something like 30,000 euros, I believe, a year or so, which obviously makes it much more feasible. And also look for materials that also can be used and built on, for example, several of the IFSs that included digital currencies and so on, meant that they develop, created or relied on open source data, but also resulted in the development of open source data. So some of this data can already be used rather than developed from scratch. Sorry. Also, seek best practice examples and inspiration. Look for opportunities to have exchanges with other cities that have already tried and tested a given IFS you're interested in. And I align IFSs with local strategies and laws to really ensure political buy-in and support. We noticed this particularly in cities where there was already big dedication or to greening or to improving sustainable behavior and so on. This really helped create momentum. And one last slide, our recommendations for policymakers. Look for and address regulatory hurdles that stall the implementation of IFSs in cities. Introduce regulations that would make the implementations of IFSs easier. So this could be, for example, regulations around the creation of virtual currency or micro-entrepreneurship policy to enable citizens to perform tasks in the cities without facing tax issues. Provide funding for experimentation through grants, subsidies, and partnerships. Develop national-level financial instruments that really blend EU funding with commercial financing to enable municipalities to access much larger pools of funding. Also create platforms where cities with similar problems and ideas or solutions for IFSs can come together and really address them collectively. Support standardization. So for example, standardization around the digital coins or standardization around some tools and instruments that can be deployed to other cities. Offer technical assistance and capacity building programs, share best practices, as I said, because IFSs are still quite new and a lot needs to be done around, well, quite new to cities, and a lot needs to be done to increase the awareness and knowledge around them. And finally, fund exchanges between cities and projects. And this is the last slide from our side, but we are happy to discuss more in detail during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. And I think this was like a lot of valuable information. I'm so happy to see this part. I need to be very pragmatic with the time because the plan was to start from 11, really the discussion. So if it's fine for all of you, we take note of the question from the chat. If you have questions, continue to put them there. We will look at them. But I will propose that we give the space now to the colleagues from the Urban Agenda Partnership on Food to explain their reaction, and then the colleagues from Greening Cities. And after this, we go and we take all the questions, and we will have around 1 hour for discussion. If that's okay for you, then I will invite colleagues from Food. I do have the presentation, so I can open it here, but I do not know exactly who will be speaking, or I have it on my other side. Ioana, perfect. Yeah. Ioana, will you like to share the slides from your side, or will you like me to share the slides?
I think it's probably easier for me to share them directly.
Perfect.
So if
Perfect.
you, yeah, I have the right to share, so I will just open the presentation.
If you can manage around 7-10 minutes, then with the same space for others, we should be able to start at 11 for the discussion.
Okay, no pressure. I will do my best.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Alex, for bringing us together. I think it was a very good idea because from what we could see in the presentation, I think that we have some joint points and some common logic, I think, in our approach on innovative funding as well. Thank you. So first of all, about our status, our partnership is more in the early stages. So we are currently brainstorming potential actions. So that is why you will see a lot of options that are still open. And I think that today's discussion is very important for us to also put some order in our thoughts and in our ideas and maybe prioritize. As a working group, we selected 4 subtopics for our innovative funding working group. We have one subtopic on funding mapping. That means funding and financing sources and mechanisms mapping, because what we understand through innovative funding is also somehow what you presented, the innovative mechanisms, but we try to split that between funding and financing and investment. So we try to put some order in the wording as well. Then we have the SME support subtopic that looks at the role that local and regional authorities, cities and regions can play in supporting entrepreneurship and SMEs, because we think that by supporting the private sector, and particularly SMEs, innovators, entrepreneurs, we can also generate more into our local economies. Then we have the subtopic on research and innovation that looks again in the same logic with the SMEs support, looks into the role that cities and regions can have in supporting research, innovation, and the integration of the results of research and innovation processes in food systems development. And then we have the subtopic on public-private partnerships. We think it's really important because we can still see only few functional public-private partnerships. So we want to see what we can do more in order to support sustainable regional and local food systems by enabling public-private partnerships. So this is somehow the logic behind our 4 subtopics. And some of our expected impacts as we see them in these still early stages. We hope to support the development of a dedicated food funding framework and an increased capacity for food funding and financing. We think that this is still in the early stages, but with food emerging as an important topic at European level, not only for the private sector, but also for cities and regions, it's important to improve and further develop these frameworks. Of course, we look at increasing the capacity and involvement of local, regional, national authorities to support food innovation. This is what we want to do as a partnership, and this is why we are here. Improved targeted funding for food innovation, improved mapping of funding for food innovation, and the same for engaging with the private sector, with SMEs, entrepreneurs, and the increased public-private cooperation and use of combined funding. And what are our initial ideas for possible actions to be further developed and implemented, we hope? When we talk about funding and financing mapping, we identify the need for the actual mapping of food funding and financing, of course, focused on cities and regions' needs and what is applicable for cities and regions, because we realized that since food is not necessarily a specific topic for funding, right now the sources and the information are very fragmented. So whenever a city or region wants to go and apply for funding, they have to identify the sources to understand, does it go into green? Does it go into innovation? Does it go into smart specialization? So we want to try to put some order in this chaos and understand what's the place of food and what's out there. Then based on that, we want to contribute to creating or mapping, let's say, a funding framework and a clear taxonomy of food-related concepts. We want to clarify and have a clear position on why do we have to invest in food? What does it mean to fund food policy? What aspects are relevant? What are key priorities and needs of cities? What are the main steps for a city or a region to fund and to budget for food policies? Of course, we think it's important to have a handbook for cities and regions on budgeting food policies, and we have a good starting point from the Food Chairs project. And nothing without capacity building. So we think it's important to have actions for building the capacity of public employees and technicians on actually accessing the funding that we are mapping and budgeting for food policies and implementing these policies through different projects. Then in terms of SME support, we identified 4 possible actions, or we tried to group actions in 4 main categories. First, it's strategies or guidelines, the main steps for cities and regions to support food SMEs and entrepreneurs. So what does it mean to support them, how to do them, how to engage with entrepreneurs and have an active role? Because we think that cities and regions have to move beyond their traditional role as a public authority and become a real partner for the local entrepreneurs and SMEs, and this also includes local producers when we talk about food. Then we discuss about very specific actions to solve city challenges and regional challenges, and we identified hackathons and ideathons as possible actions to engage with SMEs and entrepreneurs. And another option to solve these challenges would be designing specific calls based on regional and local priorities and financing the initiatives on these specific challenges on these specific challenges. And another very specific action, but that we think is important, would be creating models or guidelines for developing food hubs. And again, what is the role of cities and regions in this? This has to do a lot with governance. This has to do a lot with partnership, and again, with a new way of working, particularly when we talk about food. Research and innovation has more or less the same logic. So we started with strategies for cities and regions to actually engage with the research and innovation partners and become active players in the regional or local innovation ecosystems. We think it's important to clarify this for cities and regions and to show them how they can play this active role, what would be the steps, what would be possible sub-actions. And this also includes very simple things like organizing events, putting together a working living lab, organizing fairs, and so on. Then we talk about models or guidelines for agri-food research and innovation hubs. This goes hand in hand with the model or guidelines for food hubs. So probably it could be one joint action, but we wanted to highlight the innovation side of it. And also goes hand in hand with the next action on creating an experimentation framework. And you talked about that in the previous presentation. We think it's important to create an experimentation framework where cities and regions can actually test what we write in the strategies, what we write in the guidelines, through competitions, through pilot projects, through living labs. Food is still an emerging topic, and we want to give cities and regions trust to actually get involved in these kind of initiatives and fund them or look for funding for them. And nevertheless, again, capacity building, twinning, networking programs for cities to learn from each other, for regions to exchange experiences and create maybe the environment for further joint initiatives. And last but not least, the public-private partnerships and investment framework. Here we proposed the development of guidelines on public-private partnership frameworks to support regional and local food systems. We have a lot of guidelines, it's true, but we think that they are necessary because both food and innovative funding are kind of new topics. And we have to start with the beginning, with mapping everything and setting some steps and providing examples. Then we have the guidelines and or frameworks on investment and impact financing. In the same logic, we have to propose some clear steps and sub-actions, and a good and bad practices libraries, because we want to learn from examples and from the experiences so far. So if you found some good examples, you have them, but if you also found some bad examples in your study, it would be very interesting for us. We can look at them. And nevertheless, we have an open point. We were thinking about the need for some kind of a guarantee fund, because again, since we are talking about emerging topics, cities and regions don't always have the resources and maybe even the political will to take all the risks by themselves in order to apply for projects, to propose, I don't know, projects that are maybe not necessarily bankable, to go out there and ask for not only funding but also financing. So we don't have a specific action here yet, but we would like to find a system to also discuss or explore a possible guarantee fund or mechanism. And this is all. Sorry.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you very much, Ioana. And I already see some connection with what the colleagues presented in their study, which is great. With no further ado, please, I will invite Anne-Marie and Etienne to prepare their presentation. And until then, you can add your question for the presentation of Ioana. I include here also the experts from Rambo that did the study. And when we open the discussion, then we will take it all one by one and try to cover all of them. In the interest of time, Anne-Marie, will you present the slides from your side, or is it?
I don't have slides. I was just thinking
okay.
about a short introduction.
Absolutely fine.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Well, the important framework for our partnership greening cities is the positive voting for the nature restoration regulation. And what we are doing in the partnership greening cities is that we are working on the implementation of this regulation, because member states all have to develop nature restoration plans, and an important part of nature in member states is nature within cities. We have several actions concerning things like getting a grip on the need and the demand for green in cities, and on monitoring, things like that. And we have two important actions on funding, because funding for green areas in cities is a problem, is a challenge. And I think it's good to add that it's not just about green areas in cities, but it also includes green recreational areas, the growth of the amount of green in cities regarding being more climate adaptive in cities. It's also about nature and biodiversity. It's also about water resilience. So it's quite broad. We have two funding actions in our partnership. The first one concerns a structural funding for green in cities. That has to do with structural funds from the EU to member states. And we are going to develop a position paper on and to advise to the European Commission how we want to advise how greening in cities can be funded in a more structural way. And we have another action that concerns innovative ways of funding. And Etienne, I think you can explain that part.
Yes, of course. Very briefly, so yes, the objective of Action 5 is to work on innovative funding mechanisms and system to allow city to diversify the source of funding, including private and public one, for financing green infrastructure, but also the long-term maintenance of the green infrastructure, which is really important. And so there is 3 sub-action. I summarized that very briefly. First, linked to the Inception report, yes, we saw that there are already existing, a few examples are already existing in terms of financing green infrastructure, but they are quite limited. If I refer to the slide I just saw before, there was 2 examples of green infrastructure on a total of 15 or more. So maybe it's good to know that we will, of course, highlight those best practice and go further to analyze them. So we need to know, why is it limited for green infrastructure? Why there is no broader application, I mean, from cities of those mechanisms? And of course, is it applicable for all size of cities? So not only big one, but also local municipality, which is sometimes a problem for them to get access to this kind of innovative funding. That's one sub-action. The other one is that for the other more, let's say, conventional financial instrument, we mentioned equity financing, revolving funding, etc. So we saw also a picture of the 15 different financing instruments that we have. There will be at city levels, we need to understand, why do cities do not apply for those conventional financial instruments? Is it a lack of human resource, a lack of capacity, internal capacity, a lack of understanding, a lack of partnerships? So we need to understand, to better understand, why do cities do not apply broadly to those financial instruments? And then we will also ask the banking sector, why do they not more broadly finance the green infrastructure and nature-based solutions? So all the green infrastructure that we can, of course, support. Is it because green infrastructure or nature-based solutions are not so attractive for them? Is it a question of return of investment? It's sometimes not possible to measure it. Is it a problem of knowledge in terms of cost benefits of solution, of nature solution? Is it because there is no reference framework? And I think it is sometime. So we need to ask the banking sector and actor to clarify this. And it's based on the report of the European Investment Bank, which is also a partner in the Greening City Partnership, that say that, yes, nature-based solution and all the things around nature is not attractive for the private sector. If you read this report, that's one of the main conclusions. So we need to understand why. And then based on that, the second sub-action, we will organize the last sub-action, which is the roundtable, physical one with the cities and the banking sector, to analyze the conclusion of those 2 first sub-action and to build on, to make recommendation. It could also include training scheme, capacity building training, etc. We need to analyze the driver, what could be the driver, what could be the condition to give to city access to the financing world, and maybe, and I really hope that will be the case, maybe to innovate in new financial products and enhance with city and the financial sector. So that, to summarize in very briefly, that are the 3 sub-action of Action 5. I hope it was clear.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure if Annemarie, you wanted to add something more on this this part here.
No.
Maybe one underlying element that I want to say for the wider audience here. Again, the food partnership is in the process of defining and creating their action that will likely start to be implemented next year. The Greening Cities Partnership have drafted, received feedback and finalized actions. So the 2 actions that Annemarie and Etienne have presented are in their final form, and they are already in the process of starting the implementation. So this is an important distinction between the two of them. That's why Ioana was talking about subtopics and the colleagues from Greening Cities were talking about actions. I would like to thank you all as presenters because we are actually good with the timing. What I would like to do now is to very shortly present the two questions. Sorry. The two questions we received via the registration form in terms of content. And after that, we will have a look on the question received in the chat. My colleague Rafaela also monitored this and will help me to cluster them. And I would like to, after that, to open the discussion to all of you and really engage in the information shared on one hand by the colleagues from that did the report, so the experts, and also by the colleagues from the action that work on the Urban Agenda Partnership. With that said, I will just mention the two questions received via the registration, and I will also put them in the chat for convenience. So we have one colleague that asked, what are the conditions to have a large-scale deployment of innovative financing mechanisms by all cities of all sizes? And the second one will be, what are the main barriers that cities face with regards to innovative financial schemes? How could grant reliance be overcome considering the high investment gap, particularly for climate-related investments? Those questions have been put in the registration form and are mainly addressed to the experts. So I will propose that we start maybe with this, and then with my colleagues, we will take all the questions from the chat. We have time until more or less 11:55. And again, it's an open discussion. Feel free to raise your hand or quickly intervene. But let's try to make space for all people to have their possibility to make comments or ask questions. With that said, for these two questions, I will invite the experts on the study, so Karen and her colleague, to give a bit of remarks to this, let's say, concerns of the colleagues we have. Okay, so Karen.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexandru, and thank you also for the presentations before that. It made it, certainly made it more concrete in at least my head as to what is it that you're working on. Maybe just before I move on to talking about the questions, it's important to also mention that the case studies will be published. The exact date, I don't know, Ray, maybe you can say, but like in the next let's say couple of months. So they are quite extensive, actually. So, for example, I saw in the chat that there was interest in the proto-urban jungle. So there you could really, they're like 6 to like 8 to 9 to 10 pages long, like deep dives into these IFSs and these particular projects. So I believe this would be quite interesting for you, because we really we describe the IFSs, we describe who was involved, we describe things about their sustainability, scalability, replicability, to what extent they were considered successful, what was innovative about them, what were the enabling conditions, what were the barriers, and the overall context and conditions that kind of helped or created barriers for their implementation. So there's quite a bit of information in those. So I would encourage you to have a look at them when they become available. One last thing also, we will be developing a guideline of our own. I know you mentioned guidelines, but there will be a guideline which will kind of be summarizing the main outcomes and findings, so in a much more digestible, so not in the report that we developed, but something that is kind of easier for cities to, mainly urban, the target audience is urban practitioners in general, so something that will be kind of simpler to digest, but summarizes the main information. So this will also become available in the coming months, again, a couple of months, and Ray, I'm sure you will communicate internally when...
Yes, it's in the chat.
Okay, great, perfect. Thank you. Then if I go back to your questions, I mean, I think I tried already in anticipating those questions to address them a little bit in the presentation and in the slides that we had. So in terms of the overall conditions to enable a large-scale deployment of IFSs, I think this is where we need to go back to the recommendations, particularly to what is it that policymakers can do. And, this first of all starts with kind of offering technical assistance, ensuring there is capacity building programs, sharing best practices, having exchanges between cities. So this is more the type of activities that would really encourage, first of all, people to become more inspired, more aware of what is it that IFSs can offer. And then also technical assistance, very important, because it really, like, from speaking to the various projects that were involved in that were the various we spoke mainly to municipalities that were involved in the implementation of the project. Just making sure that they have the right team, making sure that they have the right skills, making sure that they have the right even understanding of the needs of the target group. This is all very important and needs to be taken into account. Beyond that, also we mentioned the regulatory hurdles. Maybe I can give you an example from one case study. So that's one of the case studies that was not mentioned earlier. It was WESH in the Netherlands. They really wanted to set up a system that would enable them to engage citizens in maintaining the public spaces, because they didn't have sufficient resources to really make sure that the public spaces are well maintained. So they thought that they could implement some sort of an incentive mechanism that would encourage citizens to get involved. However, and they would get kind of reimbursed, or like they would get a small amount of, it was again a virtual currency, so it wasn't even like euros that they were getting tokens that they can then use in the local kind of shops. But this created enormous hurdles for them. First of all, because the central bank was concerned that all of a sudden they are developing kind of a parallel currency, and only the central bank is allowed to establish currencies. But also there were very significant hurdles when they had to convince the tax authorities that the little amount that the citizens were receiving for the work performed should not be taxed, or they really required that each person, because that would have meant that it would not have been attractive for them to it would not have made any sense for them to then be involved in the delivery of in kind of being involved in this initiative. And also there was at some point even a requirement for them to register as kind of a single entity. So that would have meant that there would have been a lot of paperwork. They would have had to engage only to paint the like a dustbin, sorry, a bin, or like a bench or something like that. So there were significant hurdles. So making sure that issues like this, that there is more room for experimentation, that's issues like when cities are trying to experiment, there is a little bit more of a leeway for them, like a little bit more of a room for them to try to experiment, and so that they don't have to spend months trying to we're really talking about very small sums of money. So it really felt like in this particular case, it really felt that there was it was unnecessary. So this is another main avenue, really trying to address any regulatory hurdles that really stall the implementation of IFSs, and also just the desire and ability to experiment. We mentioned also like blending EU funding with commercial financing. So not only relying on one source, but just becoming much more agile in the way that like funding is accumulated and mobilized and distributed is also important. We mentioned also, relying on like creating like basically the cities need to have better knowledge about available tools and available resources that they already have at their disposal, be it that within their cities or being inspired by other cities, or as we mentioned, this instrument from Rotterdam for social impact schemes, that they can really just use something that is already developed. So I imagine that more tools like this will become available that cities can then purchase and adapt to their needs. So these are just a few thoughts from my perspective. Eileen, if you have anything to add, please do.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything you said. I think one of the main conditions that need to change is our culture. And Iona discussed earlier the need for training and capacity building. I think that's really critical. The question is, should that training and capacity building go wide and broad to all employees, or should there be dedicated teams within municipalities who have that expertise? I think that's something we need to reflect on. That knowledge is simply not there. The culture is not there. I think programs like the UIA were really important in terms of attaching the need to experiment with IFSs to grant funding. And if we could see that more mainstreamed, so there are so many different grant programs, Interreg, URBACT, etc., Horizon, if we could attach conditions to the grant funding to strongly encourage cities to pilot and experiment with IFSs, it would start in some way, shape and form to start to develop that culture. Because right now, we talk about quadruple helix, that's very mainstream, but I don't think cities yet fully collaborate as much as they could be with the financial sector, and that has to become more mainstream. So I would say those two things are key: experimentation, or those three things: experimentation, training and capacity building, and that cultural shift are key to kind of making this more mainstream. Of course, was also mentioned the sharing of different information between cities.
Thank you both. My colleague Ray has a hand, so I will in a second give her the space. I want to also guide with the timing. So we still have a couple of questions in the chat, so I would like to, if possible, to scale the answer to the core part so we can cover most of the questions, hopefully all of them. If the people that address these questions that are now on the screen have a quick reaction to it, now is the moment to do that. Ray, you have the space, and then we continue with the rest of the questions.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, this was more of a reaction, I guess, to the comment of Eileen, to say that to increase the culture and to change sort of the culture of experimentation with programs such as ours, which is very much branded under experimentation and innovation. I completely agree with that. However, I think at least at the EU level, there is this idea that public funding is very precious, quote unquote, which is why we have so many regulations. I mean, this is one of the feedback that we get from the cities. It's actually quite complicated to apply for funding, even programs such as ourselves, which is really for innovation and experimentation. So it is there for cities, even, I mean, quote unquote, not be successful sort of in their experimentation. However, yes, so other programs, as you mentioned, Horizon 2020, backed Interreg, things like that, it's it's quite complicated to be funded first. There's not so much room for innovation, I suppose. So I think this would be my view of why cities, this culture might not be there, or there's this hesitation towards going a step further than the traditional funding. And we have a lot of fantastic questions actually also in the chat. So yeah, I think we can go there as well. You're muted, Alex.
Thank you for that, Ray. Yeah, so indeed, Rafaela, our colleague, carefully monitored the question in the chat. So Rafaela, if you can guide us to the main one, so we managed to cover most of them, hopefully all of them in the time remaining, please.
The first two questions were partially already addressed by the expert in the chat. So the first two were about if you identified any land capture mechanism in the report, and if there were any food and greening projects among the selected projects in the reports. And so you already addressed this question in the chat. I don't know if you want to add something. Otherwise, we go to the third question.
I saw the answer. I don't think we have anything else to add, but indeed, sort of for greening, it will be mostly the proto-urban jungle. But as Ray was saying, there are other areas that are, maybe related, but not exactly like circular economy. So, but that was the Antwerp Circular South. Specifically for greening, I would say it's really the proto-urban jungle project.
And if I may add, part of our aim with this study was to identify these sort of different types of financial schemes, but also to look at them as transversal and sort of cross-sectoral. So it's not the fact that the projects were not funded under the exact same topic of greening cities and food should not stop you from exploring these IFSs used by projects under different topics. So we hope that you get inspired by these IFSs, even though their topic does not entirely match yours.
Yes, I fully agree, because I know earlier I wanted to also mention, I believe, Ioana, you were mentioning the public-private partnership and kind of diving deeper into that. And we have a case study that's specifically focusing on public-private partnership. It's in the area of integrating migrants into the workforce. However, the main the main components and the mechanisms behind it should be applicable to any area.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then there is a third question about specific policy recommendation for the EU level to enable the use of innovative funding schemes. So maybe you can address this question now.
I just wanted to see first if Ray has something to say, because I believe you said in the chat that
it's not specifically regarding the question as per se, but I just wanted to mention that there is a very huge interest in this study, and specifically the use of financial schemes by cities at the EU level. The European Commission really does monitor this study a lot and is interested to see how cities can take their recommendations. So yeah, there is a huge interest, and there's a huge, I would say, political will behind using financial schemes at the city level, as Clary said initially at the beginning of her presentation. So the financial instruments have been used in different sectors at a larger level for infrastructure projects. Using them at the local level, like this, is quite new and has the support of EU. However, for recommendations, I would leave it to you, Carrie, to complement.
Yeah, so far our recommendations have been just generally addressed to policymakers, and by this we mean at national level or EU level, but indeed we can look into trying to make them a little bit more specific and more tangible when it comes to EU specific actions.
Okay, thank you. Then we have another question about innovation, and if the fact that financing becomes an integral part of the strategic design of each project, rather than treating it as a byproduct of implementation needs. Does innovation also lie in this fact, that financing becomes an integral part of the strategic design of each project?
I would say it should be a key recommendation coming out of the report, certainly. It kind of goes back to the point I made earlier. It shouldn't be just maybe it will happen, maybe it won't. It should be attached as a condition of grant funding and mainstreamed.
Okay, so I don't know if there are other suggestions from the expert about this point or comments.
Maybe I can just add, because earlier we were also talking about, the fact that cities kind of should be working more towards becoming very nimble with navigating all of the different types of financing. And just wanted to mention that indeed, like during our research, the so-called financial architect as a specific kind of
skill set.
Yeah, skill set, but also like a position within municipalities as somebody who I wasn't able to find like an exact definition, but in general, that would be someone who can put together complex financial strategies, and somebody who can build partnerships and really champion innovative financing. So somebody who's really fixated not just on applying for grants, but really has a kind of a wider role in really understanding the kind of the universe of different financing options and working together to implement it and having very, I would say, a creative approach to it. So yeah, that would be maybe one way to make this a little bit more mainstream as well within cities.
I would like to mention that, of course, most of the questions are now addressed to the experts that did the study because they worked intensely for the last period on this. But if you, as participants, have a remark or a linked question, please, the space is for you. This time is for you to interact. So feel free to open the mic or raise your hand and intervene in the discussion. Ray.
Yes, I actually did have a question myself. During your presentation, Carrie, and we haven't had the opportunity to discuss this as well. Surprisingly to me, not a lot of people have raised regulatory flexibility. I think you've mentioned as one of the hurdles, as one of the obstacles. No, sorry, as one of the enabling factors. Yet they have said they face regulatory hurdles. So I wonder how you could justify this sort of inconsistency.
Yeah, you're right, because in the survey, indeed, only 4 people said that the regulatory flexibility is something they would like to see. Wow, this was one of the main issues that was mentioned. I wouldn't be able to answer, yeah, for sure, because I'm not in their shoes, but I would imagine that those who really struggled with the regulatory hurdles then really said that they needed flexibility. And I can really think of a few case studies, so not in all of them, but in a few case studies where they really said, yeah, this was a huge challenge for us that almost kind of jeopardized the implementation of. It's a good point, but I don't have I think it's really those who really struggled probably asked for flexibility.
Yeah. And I mean, we've seen with our successful examples, for example, Villa de Cannes, with the introduction of the virtual currency, how they managed to sort of make it very successful was the fact that the Bank of Spain was behind it. Also, for example, for Ghent, the Icarus project, they've created sort of a governing body, if I can call it that it would last beyond, I don't know, political cycles. So yeah, I guess that's a very good enabling factor. Thank you.
Definitely.
Rafaela, would you like to continue with the? Yeah,
I
perfect.
don't see any other question for the moment in the chat. So
okay.
Yeah.
Until people maybe connect to their next question, and again, it will be valuable to learn more on how greening cities, especially that presented here, can better implement their defined action and how food partnership could better define their action. Until we get to that point, there was several mention about the interest of the colleagues in the European Commission for this study and for the topic in general. And I want to underline that in all urban agenda partnership, the European Commission is represented with their DGs. Sometimes they are even leading some of the partnership. And I'm happy that also in this meeting here, there are some colleagues that took from their available time to participate. It's a very good sign. And I think most of it, if not all partnerships are presented here from the old generation, such as migration and refugee urban agenda partnership, to the newest one, food, greening cities, cities of equalities, and sustainable tourism. So that's a very good sign. If there are new questions, I invite you.
Perfect. Yeah, there is a new question regarding greening cities. So private finances of greening city would require cash flow after project completion, but this is usually not the case with greening projects. How can an innovative financing system help with this?
I was just writing in the chat, but it's better if I speak, I suppose. I think when it comes to maintenance, you're right. Like that's, there isn't generally cash flow when it comes to private financing for the maintenance. But there are particular points of the innovative financial schemes that I think can show some interest in this area, such as incentive schemes, crowdfunding, community-based schemes. So I think you really have to look at the partnership models when it comes to maintenance. Who is in your ecosystem? Whose energy and resources can you bring on board to cover the maintenance? And any of the city examples that I've looked at, it is that kind of community-based partnership that comes in there. Even business improvement districts, greening benefits everybody, the economy as well. So, if the businesses want to have their green environment, which does add to placemaking and bring people into town centres, then they need to play a role in maintaining it. So I think things like incentive schemes, partnerships, etc., they're all the ones that really are probably going to get you some wins when it comes to maintaining the green infrastructure. And just maybe another point to mention is that this mobilizing resources and private sector investment, we're at a key point for this with the CSRD directive, with the increasing onus on private sector bodies to report what they're doing from an environmental and social perspective. It's time to jump on that as cities. And what frightens me a little bit is that many cities don't understand this. They don't know what CSRD is. They don't know that this onus is going on the private sector to report from a social and environmental perspective. And it's not just the big companies, this is trickling down the supply chain to the small companies as well. So businesses more and more they need a way to easily show that they're contributing socially and environmentally. If they don't, they're just not going to get the investment that they require to keep going or to scale. And there's an opportunity there for cities to understand this and to liaise with them and find synergies and ways that they can build kind of symbiotic relationships where they can work together, and maintaining green infrastructure is a great example of that. Hope I answered your question okay.
I think that was quite an insightful answer, so thank you very much for it. If there are new questions, of course.
Was my question. You gave some
maybe introduce yourself.
Sorry, I'm Wessel Wickrink. I'm an investment strategist of the municipality of Utrecht. Annemarie has asked me to join, and I am more or less working on indeed financing different of what we call the 10 minutes city, what's called 15 minutes in other cities, but we want one and smaller in 10 minutes. So all the things, all the public investments, and that's a little bit of my role. What I really liked about your answer, Aline, is indeed the maintenance part. And I think that's doable, but the big part is the investment in the beginning. And we as municipalities don't have the money to do the big investments. And if you want private investors also participate in your investments, then you need some kind of business model for the private investor. So and that's quite big money, because when you greening something gives a lot of societal benefits, but the societal benefits are very good for the society and that's also for as municipality very nice, but it gives no money for the investment because we have to pay the people that make the trees, build everything. So that makes a little bit difficult. There are indeed quite good societal benefits, but there is not really cash coming in. So and then a public-private partnership is quite difficult, I think.
Yeah. I hear you. I mean, it's not a new piece of information that monetizing these ecosystem services is still a key challenge for us. I think that's not the only challenge. I know that if you were a politician in the council chamber in my city here in Cork and you suggested going out to access loans for green infrastructure for the city, you would be laughed out of the council chamber. I mean, people would just think that's absolutely crazy. There is still not a mainstream appreciation of green infrastructure. You know, it's still not taken seriously. Development is still kind of engineering led. I think initiatives like the New European Bauhaus will hopefully change that. Again, we're seeing a shift to integrating New European Bauhaus values and principles in cohesion policy funding. And more that will require more of a transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary team working of projects.
There is someone with an
Yes,
open mic,
Sophie,
and
if
we
you
hear a
mind,
lot of background.
maybe we can mute her actually as the...
Yes,
Yeah,
let's.
okay.
Perfect.
Great.
Perfect. Thank
Go
you
ahead,
very much.
Eileen,
Please
sorry.
continue.
Yeah, I mean, so that gives me some bit of hope, but again, this is slow and we want to go fast. So yeah, as I said, monetizing ecosystem services is the key challenge, but it's not the only one. We need more transdisciplinarity in our design and implementation of projects, which will hopefully bring in more of an appreciation for green infrastructure. I think those cities who want to become carbon neutral by 2030, part of the Net Zero Cities programme, will help. It's certainly helping in our own city in Cork because there is pressure to deliver on these promises. But we do definitely have issues to tackle. And I mean, even if you look at some of the policy objectives linked to cohesion policy, you know, green infrastructure really isn't specifically mentioned in any of them. So how do we shift to that culture when it's not even specified in policy objectives? I don't want to end on such a hopeless note, but there is some hope.
No, we're here to because we have a common interest and we know together are stronger. So it's just to be realistic, pragmatic, and to find solution. Thank you for that. Ioana, you were waiting for some time. Maybe also remind our colleagues from where are you?
Oh, sorry.
Hi, yes, I am from Brasov, which is actually Alexandru's hometown. So I'm glad to represent. Yeah, I think this was a very, very good point and maybe a fresh perspective. And thinking about our actions, I think that it's not only about monetization; it's also about building capacities and these new skills of business planning, actually. So thinking about our actions on capacity building and also on the subtopic of public-private partnerships, do you think it would be a good idea to include an action on actually business planning for food projects? Generically, of course, we have to classify these projects and understand the interventions. And also, I think it also applies to greening, to the greening cities projects. But I think that business planning and providing this new perspective to cities and regions could be key for enabling part of the other actions that we are proposing. But this is a reflection and then a question. Do you have any good examples on this? So is this a thing in other cities that we could bring to our partnership and to our case studies maybe?
I can jump in before handing to Carrie, maybe. I agree, it's critical, absolutely critical. Business planning skills, it's not something, again, it isn't not that I'm aware of an identified skill set within municipalities. And I agree, it's also relevant to green infrastructure as much as it is to food and every other topic if you look at it. So things like multi-use spaces, for example, if you have a park, how do you fund the maintenance of the park? You know, you can have, say, for example, mobile cafes or event spaces and try to get revenue in that way. So we have to start thinking like entrepreneurs, and we're not yet. I think your other question was I would agree that it makes sense to include it in some shape or form of an action, because I think it's a gap. Did we identify an example from our study on a city that has this as a skill set? Was that the question, Iona? Was that the question?
Yes,
Sorry.
either as a skill set or if they're doing something about it. Is
Okay.
someone trying to rethink the way they plan their project and have this business perspective in mind? So not only thinking about grants and attracting funding, but also financing and a different
I can try
perspective on
to.
project planning.
Yeah, I can try to jump in here. I mean, we need to keep in mind that these projects were implemented within the bounds of the UAEU, so they had already received funding. So it was more about how they were using this funding. But I would say all of the projects involved people coming together, really thinking, really planning. But I wouldn't say that we have like this perfect example maybe that you're looking for like around business planning. But indeed, it was like planning and really like strategizing around how the funding is used or how its used is governed or distributed or mobilized was a key part of each project.
Yeah, and maybe just the example of bridge from Rotterdam. So they, as Carrie said, like the projects were only 3 years, so there was a limited amount of time there. But a bridge in Rotterdam, after the project ended, they got $1 million from Bloomberg Philanthropies, which allowed them to continue to pilot their model. And they, as Carrie mentioned previously in her presentation, they now have it at a point where like it's ready to sell to other, as an off-the-shelf kind of model for other cities who want to integrate it into their own organization.
Thank you. I see new questions coming in. Viorella, maybe you want to just take the floor and read or introduce it. I think it's easier. Huh?
Yes, thank you, Alexandro. And hello, everyone, again. First of all, thank you for all the valuable information. On my side, I will also make sure that I share it wherever it's relevant and to all municipalities interested, also in the future partnerships that the urban agenda for the EU is starting, in particular the water-sensitive cities that I will be supporting. And on a more practical note, I'm interested to know if this report will be communicated further, maybe in a catalog, or how would you plan the dissemination to make sure that it's as impactful as possible? We've been talking about how this is still an experimental space in terms of local level options. So maybe you have some plans that you can already share. And I'll be
Yes, I
happy to
can
support
answer
that.
that.
Thank you.
Yes, so as we mentioned, this was an Inception report that was shared with you. However, we plan to publish a final report, which is the findings that the experts presented today, along with the 11 case studies that we looked into. So in these case studies, as you will see, we'll have the topics that they explored with their projects, the funding that they were granted by UAEU, and the amount for the innovative financing scheme that they put in place, plus the recommendations and the hurdles and challenges that they faced as well. So that would be available on all of our online platforms, including Portico that I shared the link to, as well as the UAEU website. As Carrie mentioned, we will also develop a resource guide for cities, which will be, and also infographics. So very hopefully easily readable to cities to use this resource guide as well. We also, with Alex, wanted to also share some future opportunities, but I guess this is a good moment for me as well to mention that next year we will also have what we call a policy lab on the topic of access to funding. This is in our work plan, however, to be confirmed, and the date as well. We would confirm that, with the sufficient, in advance notice, so that hopefully everybody can attend. So yeah, we have plans on publishing it as much as possible and making the dissemination very clear to everybody.
Thank you both. This was actually one of the slices reserved for the next steps at the end of the meeting, but there's absolutely no problem. It's an open discussion. We still have around 15 minutes, which is great. So feel free to jump in with questions or even comments if you have remarks. And until the next colleagues take the courage to address that, I have a question. As I mentioned, I do not consider myself in no way an expert on the topic, so my question might be a basic one. But you mentioned in your report, the two experts, about the community land trust. We know there are several examples in Europe. I think Belgium is very active, including Brussels, and some of this. Most of them, to the limited knowledge I have, focus on creating housing and balancing a bit the huge pressure that is currently in the entire European Union on housing. But since here we're talking about food and green cities between others, I was curious if you are aware from the study you did now or from the previous experience about community land trusts that focus not on creation of housing units, but on, for example, green spaces such as parks. Are there any examples?
I can just briefly say that on the basis of the project, at least within the UAE, it was really about housing. But I'm not sure if Eileen, at all from your previous experience, you've stumbled upon something like that.
Yeah, I would agree with Carrie. That didn't come up in any of the examples in the study. But that's not to say that elements of it couldn't be implemented. You mean like you can, I suppose, integrate green infrastructure elements into housing developments. But no specific example is coming to mind, to be honest with you. And I guess the same could be applied to housing, or sorry, to food, sorry. But again, I don't have a specific example in mind.
Okay, at least we know that we're not missing information already existing. So if it is for some of the partnership to explore further on this link, at least they know there's no example yet, at least. And I have a second question, maybe if nothing else comes as more urgent. My question refers now to the alternative currencies. You mentioned several projects that did that. And I was wondering, what is the best scales at which a local or virtual currency can be used or should be created? Because it's a big difference if you have a neighborhood of 10,000 people or if you do a currency that applies in a region of 500,000 people. And I'm wondering, what is the best scale to do that?
I'm not sure if I have a clear-cut answer. From the case studies that we had, they were definitely bound to a certain geographical location that was, for example, in the one case study I'm thinking about in the Netherlands, it was really just a town of a few tens of thousands of people. And I think the bigger challenge, the bigger you go, the more challenging it gets in terms of where is it that you can actually use the currency, because within the city, the small city that I'm referring to, it really required a lot of convincing and contracting, and it becomes quite a complex maze. More, and especially in their case, they really wanted to make sure that it's not large or companies that are involved, but really they wanted to support local businesses. So that required a lot of work. I'm not sure. I think it depends if they're more willing to work with big chains or cultural institutions where maybe it's a bit easier. But if the idea is really to try to keep it really supporting the local economy at the same time, then yeah, I would say smaller scale. But Eileen, please again feel free to add.
The reason I address this is because I imagine like it also a certain scale that function. If there are just free shops in the entire city that use that currency, then as a user, you'll just complicate a bit your life and you'll always forget about it. So you'll not have an incentive to actually use it. If you have it used as a wider scale in the city, then it's easier to adapt to it because say, okay, I can use it almost anywhere. I'm not linked to a very limited. That's why I was trying to figure out the scale in terms of territory, but also in terms of users and businesses involved. But Eileen,
yeah, maybe just to react to what you just said, indeed, that was like something that was termed like the chicken or the egg conundrum, because in order for the businesses to be interested enough to join, there needed to be a critical mass of users, but then for critical mass of users to be interested, there needed to be enough businesses. So that was a kind of a tricky balance to strike for sure. But Eileen, sorry, please.
I don't have much more to add, only to say I would agree, you know, you have to think about the purpose of the currency, and they tend to work very well, like at local and community level, to support local economies or local community projects, et cetera, et cetera. But when you go wider, I mean, you could say like Bitcoin is an example, they have very different ends, I guess. So I think you have to start with why you're doing it in the first place, and then work from there to understand what scale you want to include at best. I mean, it can work, as you can see, at any scale, but I think for the purposes of sustainable urban development, then probably local community is the best kind of scale.
I find that quite insightful. Like, what is the reason you're creating another one? Yeah, that's a good point. Haris, you're...
Hello, and thank you for the very interesting presentation and study report. I'm the Thematic Partnership Officer for Greening Cities. And I want to ask a question. I mean, you referred about this culture change, and I think this is very important. So it's not only about capacity building, but about culture change, and also building to what Alexandra said before about like community land trust. So will local governments be like be willing to hand over land to community groups or cooperatives to maybe manage as cooperative models, or how will these local authorities will be able to introduce those alternative coins? For example, this needs to be definitely a culture of change. But the question here is, and this is what I wanted to address, is that who would you target for this culture change? I mean, who should be addressed to bring this culture change? Is it about officers? Is it about regional governments? Is it about heads of departments? Is it about politicians? So I think that, I mean, very big question in order to craft and design your strategy for culture change is who should be better target for this process.
That's such an important question. That's such an important question, and we all need to reflect on that. It goes a little bit back to what I said earlier. You know, where do we go with the capacity building? Do we go really broad, or do we just focus on teams? I mean, for the culture change, we need leaders, don't we? We need ambassadors. It needs to come from the top, but it also needs to be tackled at the bottom. So we need to give people the skills at the lower levels, but we also need to give higher level leaders education about the potential impact of these and why it's worth doing, and to give them, I suppose, confidence and trust in experimenting with these. We can't blame them. You know, it can be paralyzing when you hold this decision-making power to say, okay, I'm going to risk all of this on this experiment. Nobody really wants to jump in and do that. So I think we have to tackle it at multiple levels, to be honest with you. I don't know,
and the more it's normalized in a way, because through, like, let's say our study, or, you know, if you're adding stuff like this in your action plans, I think it's just the more it becomes another option that is widely known and widely accepted, I think it will make just kind of, yeah, the idea of taking this risk a little bit more palatable.
Yeah, and I would just add that the feedback that we get is that we see that there is a will at the officers level, and at the politicians level they're a bit more hesitant, as Eileen said, because they have about bigger and more global vision. And I think, as Karen said, it really helps to share these sort of success stories, sort of like a benchmark of what worked and what didn't work. I think it makes the argument more concrete for the decision makers.
Ioana, you will also like to add something, and gradually are coming to the end of the scheduled time. But Ioana, please free.
Yes, a very quick question related to experimentation. From your experience, not necessarily with the EUI, because EUI is one of the few frameworks where you really have the resources and the mechanisms for experimentation. But do you know other examples? I don't know, national level, local level, European level, that provide some framework for experimentation, or at least some financial guarantee or contribution to the financial guarantees for innovative projects.
I'm not sure if you can think of anything, Eileen. On my side, currently, I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, the same. I mean, UIA is kind of unique.
I think we do have some very short snapshots in the report. If I'm not mistaken, we mentioned some cities from Sweden, but as like a broader example, we can definitely share that with you. We have not, however, looked into them as detailed as we have for the case studies, because the scope was really to just see the practices that the UAE cities have done. And as Eileen and Karen said, yeah, I mean, our program is the one that really is there to enable cities for innovation and experimentation. But yeah, we can definitely share that with you at a later stage.
That would be great. Thank you.
Maybe if I can add, because before earlier Etienne was asking some questions about nature-based solutions, and I just wanted to know that one of the case studies is specifically focusing on a project that looked into that. I wouldn't say that it was a very successful example, but maybe it's good to just keep an eye on that for when the case studies are published.
Okay. Thank you very much to all of this input. I do. It's hard for me to come now and say that we are going to the end of the reserved time, because I see the discussion could continue for quite some long. I have short messages, remarks I want to do, and after that, I just want to announce as a next step. So first of all, a recommendation for the experts to consider for the future. In terms of the urban agenda for the EU partnership, beyond cities, which are the core of it, of course, we have partners from the regional level, from the national level, from with their ministries, the DGs from the European Commission, and other organizations such as NGOs and umbrella institutions for cities and others. So if the final report could include remarks towards this direction, they will be directly relevant for their work also. The second point I would like to mention is that I have been following Urban Agenda since 2016, when it was launched under the Dutch presidencies. And I could say that in all the partnership, which are now beyond 22, all of them had looked at funding. There are plenty of discussion about funding and finance in all the Urban Agenda partnership. It was also one of the reasons I wanted to create this synergy here today. And I think this discussion should continue. So even though today we will need to close this series of discussion, I will encourage the partnership, the organization, the cities, and also the experts to remain in this dialogue, and we will see how we can continue that, because it's so valuable for the entire European Union context. As my colleague very nicely said before, the final version of this report will come in January. So we will share it with all the partnerships and online on our website. Please follow both the European Urban Initiative website, but also the Urban Agenda for the EU website. With that said, I want to announce another valuable element. It was not all plans as such, but things come natural, build natural together. The Greening Cities Partnership had also decided at some point to have a public webinar. It is about innovating finance for green infrastructure. You can register for it, and that will take place on 5th of December. I put the link also in the chat. Feel free to share it with your network. I think will be an excellent addition to the discussion we just started here today. And with that, Ray, can you please remind me? You already mentioned the final report. You mentioned that we at EUI are trying to build EU urban lab on finance. Did I say that correctly? The name?
No.
Okay, sorry.
No, but don't worry. It's we call it a policy lab, but it's very.
Sorry, policy lab. Yeah, I'm getting old.
Yeah.
So we hope that in next year we will have a chance to invite you also on this policy lab to continue the discussion. And with that, I would like to say a very big thank you for all of you that took valuable time to be here with us, to contribute the discussion, to put questions and make remarks. I think that it went excellent. My last point today here will be to ask you if it's okay to put on our social media YouTube channel the entire recording, including with the discussion, or if you'll prefer just the presentation to be there. It's up to you for a group. If somebody has any reason to say no, just let us know. I hear nothing. I see nothing in the chat. If there's someone anyway that has second thoughts, please by the end of the day get to me an email, and we will react to that. If not, in the next day we will publish this online together with a small article with a link for the interim report, and we look forward to further building on this. A big thank you to all of the speakers and participants, and I wish you a great day for the rest of the work.
Thank you all. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Have a nice day.